Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Holmes, and I am an enterprise systems engineer with Veeam Software. Today, I'd like to spend some time talking to you about ways that Veeam can help to improve the protection of your VMware environment, your vSphere environment. Believe it or not, I actually got here early today. I was here at 8 o'clock to set up, and then 10 minutes before we decided we were going to WebEx the whole thing. So apologies for the slight delay. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is a document that one of my colleagues created, and this is openly accessible through the web. If you Google Veeam Backup VMware Best Practices, you will find this document, and it's a document created by a gentleman named Hannes over in Austria. Excellent document. Before we start, can I just have a quick show of hands? How many Veeam customers do we have in the room today? Excellent. So we have the right audience. That's a good start. Anybody read this document? Okay, so then this is the my colleague at the back has read this document. I'm sure he had some input into the documents as well. Great document. Please download it afterwards. I'm going to cover most of the information on here. It will go into in much greater depth if you dig into the documents. And I'm going to put a few more additional pieces into it as well. Anybody here attended Veeam ONE this year? Again, just the one. Okay, all right. So we'll have some information that hopefully is new and useful to you as well. Okay, promise you just that one marketing slide, and it's fairly shortened. I'll tell you a little bit about Veeam. You probably know a lot of this already. We are the fastest growing backup and DR solution in the world today. Our 2018 revenue was extremely close to 1 billion, but we're very confident we're going to make that 1 billion number this year. We have over 330,000 worldwide customers as of today. And perhaps the number we're most proud of is our Net Promoter Score. And to those who don't know the Net Promoter Score, it's a value, it's an index we use to determine how happy you as customers are. It takes a lot of things into account. The products itself, our support organization, how quickly we take new features that you suggest to us, how quickly we get them into the product. And as you can see, we're over 3.5 times the industry average. So we respond quickly to you. Your happiness is of paramount importance to us. Okay, and with that, we will jump into the first of my 10 tips for backup. And all of a sudden, my clicker decides not to work. Okay, we'll go old school. All right then, the first nice easy slow ball to get us going. Let's use the latest versions of both our software and VMware software. So we do have a number of Veeam customers in the audience today. Who here is using 9.5 Update 4a? So a minority. Update 4? 3A? Older than 3A. I'm assuming the rest of the people here. So we make huge improvements in performance and additional features with each of the releases. And as you know, a Veeam upgrade is a relatively easy process. So the recommendation is to obviously test it in your labs first, but take a configuration backup, but upgrade your environment as soon as you can. That's absolutely our recommendation. Same is true obviously for VMware, and I understand keeping your vSphere environments up to date is a lot more challenging. The big area that we are most concerned about are the older versions of vSphere. Anybody running 5.5 in the room today? vSphere 5.5? Okay, I actually was at a VMUG up in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago, and half the room were running 5.5, and that can really cause challenges, specifically around the snapshot process, the release of snapshots, which is what we're going to look at next. Okay, so big focus here is monitoring your vSphere snapshots. Veeam relies very heavily on VMware snapshots. We need that snapshot to quiesce that file system before we get a good copy of the VM. How that is handled is determined a lot by VMware, and a lot by the vSphere administrators. I'm sure in a room this size, we've all seen that snapshot that's been around for 2 years that we can't get rid of it. A lot of it is due to application owners who perhaps don't necessarily understand the mechanism of a VMware snapshot and what happens when we come to delete it. So I'm just going to walk through some basics. Hopefully this is fairly well known to you guys, but I'm just going to walk through the steps anyway. So we have a VM here, and this VM is right into this VMDK disk. And assuming we want to do a backup of this VM, we can't just start backing up that VMDK while writes are occurring to it. Obviously, we will end up with an inconsistent backup of that VM. So the first thing that occurs before we can start a backup is we will take a snapshot of the VM. We'll initiate that call to vCenter. We'll take a snapshot. When a snapshot occurs, and this is a native VMware process, that VMDK will become read-only. And we will create the Delta file. While the backup is occurring, while that snapshot is alive, all writes will be going to that Delta file. Everybody understand that? Yep. As soon as our backup is completed, actually before we get to that point, if this is a very busy VM, that Delta file will grow. So if a lot of writes are occurring while the snapshot is around, that Delta file can get quite large. And in the scenario where your application owner decides that they're going to take a snapshot and leave it around for 2 years, that Delta file can literally become the size of the original VMDK. It takes up a lot of storage space, but more importantly, it impacts the performance of your VM. And when you try to remove that snapshot, you will have issues. So, which leads me on to what we're going to talk about next. So we finished our backup at this point. We delete the snapshot, and what will occur at that point is the changes that existed in the Delta file will be merged into the original VMDK, and depending on the number of changes we've had during that period, we can encounter VM stun. Anybody encounter this issue with VMware snapshots? It does happen, and we have a number of ways to get around that. Typically, we'll see it's a very small percentage of your VMware environment that could suffer this. Typically, the very busy VMs, the VMs that are seeing a lot of transactions, they're the ones that can suffer it. And we have a number of ways to get around that. One of the first things we want to make sure is that those old snapshots are not around, because they are going to impact performance. Any Veeam ONE customers? Anybody Veeam ONE? Okay, so Veeam ONE is a great way to learn about the snapshots in your environment. If you open the monitor, you click choose your environment on the left where you want to choose, and then choose top VMs. We have this nice, easy to read page that will show you VMs by size and by age. And if we jump onto VMware's best practices, this will give us some indications of what we should be following for around snapshots. First off, number one, do not use snapshots for backups. And that's really what these application owners are doing. They are saying, okay, I'm taking a snapshot before I do an upgrade, and I'm going to leave that and use it as a recovery mechanism. It's not a recovery mechanism because it's really the original blocks. You lose those original blocks, you lose the snapshot. So number one, use Veeam to do the backup. It's a completely separate item, separate blocks. We can do the recovery. VMware recommend a number, well, there is a maximum, a physical maximum of 32 maximum snapshots in a chain, but they recommend 2 to 3. I recommend 1. Don't have more than 1 snapshot in the chain. And then finally, don't keep a snapshot around for more than 72 hours. That really comes down to the size of that Delta file. So really work to keep the snapshots in your environment small. Use that previous report that I showed you on checking your environment for old snapshots. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can do it in vCenter, you can use Veeam ONE, you can use PowerShell scripts. Every morning, know where your snapshots are and remove the old ones. Also, if there are any questions along the way, please ask. I probably should have said that at the beginning. And then another area that we sometimes will encounter some kind of performance overhead is around data stores. So everyone always blames the storage team, of course, but if backup in general is a relatively high I/O operation. So if you're backing up a lot of VMs at the same time on a single data store, that can increase the I/O. So there are mechanisms inside of Veeam that will allow you to limit the number of backup jobs based off the latency that's occurring on that particular data store. That's a setting that you can set in a job as well. So Veeam will essentially self-police itself and stop running too many jobs that may actually slow down the storage underneath the system. Okay, now we're going to get into the real depths of Veeam. We're going to choose your backup mode wisely. We essentially have 3 types of backup modes, and most customers really just let Veeam do its own thing. You know, they'll decide, hey, you know, Veeam seems to be doing a good job. It's backing up my VMs quickly enough, but it's important for us to understand how it's backing up those VMs. And essentially, there are 3 main mechanisms that Veeam will back up your VM. And what I mean by backing up, it's how the proxy will connect to the VMDKs and move them to the repository. Number 1, and in our minds is the best and fastest, is direct storage access. And that is when the proxy is going to completely bypass the VMware host and connect directly to your shared storage and pass the data blocks that way. How many customers here use fiber channel storage? NFS? iSCSI? Okay, so it's actually a fairly even split. So to use this kind of storage, especially in a fiber channel environment, it really requires some design planning. If you're using a fiber channel infrastructure, you're going to require a physical proxy that is zoned into your storage area network to be able to utilize this. It's got to be able to see those data stores across the fiber channel infrastructure. So if you just set Veeam up and just hope it's going to work, it's more than likely not going to be able to use direct storage access. The next type of transport mode, and our next preferred, is virtual appliance mode. Virtual appliance mode is when we have a virtual proxy, a VM, that will sit in or have access to your data stores where your VMs reside, and it will use a SCSI hot add method to hot add the VMDK disks and then pass the data across the VM networks back to the repository. Extremely fast, and I would say that 90% of our customers are using that mechanism. Very flexible, and it's, again, very quick. And the third mechanism we have is network or NBD mode. NBD mode is usually our last resort. And I say usually, there is a caveat to that. In NBD mode, network mode, the proxy will connect to the VMware host over the management interfaces. So it can be a limited connection depending on what your management interfaces are. I know when I was building VMware hosts, we were using 1 gig management interfaces. I'm sure that's more rare today. I'm sure a lot of people are using 10 gig management interfaces. And in that scenario, if you're using 10 gig, then it's typically a very reliable mechanism. But it certainly is adding overhead to your VMware hosts as well. So again, in a scenario where you're not forcing a particular transport mode, Veeam will always use the best mode available. It will start at the top, see if it can use it. If not, it will move to virtual appliance, and then it will move to network mode. Network mode always works. We can always connect to the host management interfaces. Has anybody dug into this? Anybody done any configuration of their environments to see which is the best, or is it just typically just let it run? You can tell in the details of the backup job. It will tell you how it actually connected to it. So it's something that more often our customers will look into when they're seeing backup windows growing. That's typically when people look into it. But in scenarios where you're looking to speed specific backups up, that's where we can look into that and make recommendations. Every VM it tries to connect to, it will run through that pass. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to quickly walk through the steps that are involved here. And again, first thing we do whenever we're going to be taking a backup of a VM, we're going to initiate a VMware snapshot. Make the call to vCenter, do a VMware snapshot. In virtual appliance and network mode, the proxy will connect through either the management interfaces or the VM networks to the VMDKs and then pass that data across to the backup repository. In direct storage access, we completely bypass the host. That's a really nice part about it. And more often than not, there's more available bandwidth to us across the storage network. So we typically get a faster throughput there as well. And then we have backup from storage snapshot. Anybody here today using backup from storage snapshots? Okay. You use Pure, right? Yep. Okay. Happy with it? Yep. Do you use it across your complete environments or just specific for certain machines?
For certain machines. There's a couple machines in backup that aren't on the Pure.
Okay. All right. So before we dig into that, let me talk about what backup from storage snapshot is. This is one of the really, really cool features of Veeam. So what we're doing here, do you remember what I was talking about earlier on with this whole concept of VM stun? VM stun will occur when your Delta file gets too big because there's been too much activity or your backup is taking too long. So in the scenario where we use backup from storage snapshot, as usual, we will take a VMware snapshot initially, but then Veeam will make a call, an API call to your storage array controller to say, hey, these VMs are on this LUN, take a storage level snapshot of this LUN. Once that storage level snapshot has been created, we will immediately delete the VM snapshots. So more often than not, your VMware snapshots are around for less than 5 seconds, no chance of VM stun. Okay, so then we have a storage level snapshot of the LUN. Veeam will then mount that storage snapshot and back it up off to the repository. So as you can see, you can back up extremely busy VMs in the middle of the day with no chance of any kind of VM stun. This is an Enterprise Plus feature. The mechanism underneath it is using direct storage access. That's the transport mode that we use to do this. Relatively easy to set up, right? You'd agree? Yep, and very reliable. So this is certainly one of the extra value adds that we have as Veeam. And if it's something that you're interested in, by all means talk to your account team. The SEs can certainly assist if you need some assistance with this. Okay, so we talked about backup from storage snapshots. So we obviously have this integration into the storage array. But what we also have at Veeam is we have this ability to view just the general storage snapshots that you're doing on your array. So this is slightly different. Instead of Veeam making an announcement to your controller to say take a snapshot, let's say you're taking snapshots on a regular basis. And I have a customer nearby here who uses Nimble as their storage array. And every 15 minutes they take storage level snapshots. Veeam is not initiating them. Veeam really has nothing to do with those snapshots. But we can peer into those snapshots and we can see the VMs inside of them. And as you can see from this, well, you probably can't from the back, but what you can do from those VM restores, file level restores, and even application level restores from those storage array snapshots. These snapshots are crash consistent. They're not application consistent because we didn't initiate a VMware snapshot before, but they are certainly accessible to be able to do these levels of restores. So what that gives my customer, the Nimble customer, it gives them the ability to, in the event of a lost file or a bad VM, they can go back to within the last 15 minutes and do a restore without having to even go to the backups. They'll do that through Veeam. It gives them a much lower recovery point objective in conjunction with the traditional Veeam backups. Are you doing that with Pure today, or are you using Pure to view those?
We haven't really actually used backup.
I do remember actually when the Pure API was first released, you couldn't actually see those initially, but with them we did actually bring that into the product. So it can certainly reduce that recovery point objective, which obviously assists us. And then one added feature that we have here as well, and this is unfortunately this feature is specific to two particular storage vendors, both NetApp and Nimble, is we can actually initiate snapshots on the production initiate the replication to the secondary, and then back them up from the secondary. So that's if you want to do, you want to initiate backups during the day, multiple times a day, and get them off the array. This is a feature that will allow that. Okay, another easy one here, but make sure, as we go back, make sure you install and upgrade VMtools, and you're going to get lots of warnings about this if you don't. The real benefit from keeping tools updated is if you have a Linux environment, it's going to use VMtools to quiesce the file system. If it's a Windows machine, we're going to make the VSS call to do that. With a Linux machine, we're going to initiate that through VMtools quiesce, and if you don't have them up to date or you don't have them installed, we won't be able to get the application consistent backup of your Linux environments. Plan your Veeam deployment with Veeam ONE. Whenever I'm doing a POC, this is the first thing I do. I install Veeam ONE, and then I run this report, and it's the VM configuration assessments. And what it'll do is it'll tell me what in the environment needs to be looked at and remedied before I can actually start the POC. Now, it's great for a POC, but it's also excellent for you from an operational perspective. It's a great report to run regularly to make sure that your VMware environment is the configuration is correct for us to be able to protect. And here are some of the common issues that we see a lot of. VMtools, as I just mentioned, older hardware versions of the machine, it will warn against that. Certain disks that can't be backed up, people who are running RDMs or else independent disks, which we can back up, but it will require us to use the agent to do that. It's good to be able to know that in advance. And then finally, the data stores with less than 10%. Obviously, that can lead to issues based off what I was talking about earlier around your snapshot retention policies. So just as a reminder, the VM configuration assessment. Okay, who here isn't afraid of ransomware these days? It seems to be something that everybody is concerned of today. Everybody is nervous of clicking on the wrong file and infecting the entire environment. So as of update 4, and it seems like we have a minority of people actually running update 4 today, we introduced a feature called Secure Restore. And Secure Restore is really built around the Veeam Data Labs technology. And what it allows us to do is, it's part of the restore process. It's going to allow you to put a restore into an isolated network segment and run an AV scan against it before you release that restore into the wild, let's say. Most ransomware infections are in your network for days, months, weeks, even years in advance before they're actually released. They're usually time released. So as a result, you've been backing up an infected machine for years, and then all of a sudden it initiates, everything becomes encrypted. You try to do a restore. As soon as that restore goes live, it will immediately reinfect everything as well. So this is a mechanism that we're using to actually get around that problem. We can actually bring a machine online. The proxy will mount the restore files, and then we'll run an AV scan against that. Hopefully with the new signatures, it will actually find the issue before we power up the machine. And then based off the results of that, we'll either make the machine go live, we'll scan it, remove the infection, take it live, or if it can't go live, we'll just abort the restore. Anybody here heard of this? Has any of your account teams talked to you about this? Yep. Okay, so it's a real nice feature. Take a look at it. It's in update 4. Okay, how about anybody here using any kind of cloud-based storage for backups or wants to use cloud-based storage for backups? Okay, so this is a really nice feature. Again, in update 4. Let's go install update 4. All right, better question. Who here is using tape still today? Okay, that's another disparity between you guys in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, there was a lot of tape. So And I still understand why so many people are using tape. You know, it's an inexpensive method of keeping data long term. You know, it can be expensive to keep that data on your storage arrays and your storage repositories. Even with deduplication, it can become expensive if you have a retention policy more than 30 days. So the question was, how can we start to use this cost-effective cloud-based object storage as a storage mechanism? And our developers, you know, certainly wanted to access that, but we wanted to make it as easy as possible for you. We didn't want you to have to create a repository in the cloud, then create a second backup copy job that's going to move the data up there. We wanted to make it seamless to the end user. So the way we did this, we created the concept of a virtual repository. And the virtual repository is comprised of two pieces. It's comprised of the performance tier, which is what you're writing to today, your on-prem repository, and then the capacity tier. Now, the capacity tier is whatever you determine is your object store. So S3, Azure Blob, or even on-prem. And interestingly enough, most of my customers who are using this today are actually using an on-prem type of object store. So that would be the capacity tier. So we have performance and capacity. Then we create a policy to say, hey, after 7 days, move my data off performance onto capacity. So that way we can keep your performance tier small, fast, available, and then we can really start to archive your data long-term into the cloud. Make sense? Extremely easy to set up. It's built around the SOBA. You probably saw the scale-out backup repository in the backup infrastructure. Create those two pieces, create the policy, and it will take care of the rest. And essentially, this is how it works. You are writing to this virtual repository. Your job will write to the SOBA, and then based off the policy, those blocks will move out to what is your performance tier. And then the really nice thing about this is it will actually leave the metadata in the performance tier. So the job itself, when you want to do a restore, the job essentially thinks that data is still in the local repository. And if you want to do a restore, it will stream those blocks back down from the object store as well. So get great performance. I actually saw a live demo of this where they were backed up to AWS, and in front of a crowd of thousands of people, they actually did an instant VM recovery from the cloud, and the VM booted. It was quite impressive to see. So we do a nice job of streaming that data as well. And the nice thing about Veeam, compared to some other vendors, is as we know, Veeam backups are self-contained. And what we mean by that is we don't need a catalog to do a restore. So, you know, years from now, if you're not even a Veeam customer and you have these backups in the repository, you can install the free version, you can scan that repository, and you can start restoring those VMs. It's self-contained. There's no concern that I'm going to have to rebuild a complex environment to be able to recover the data. So, scale out backup repository, take a look at that, play around with it. It's a really cool feature. Any VMware Cloud on AWS customers? Wow, I thought it was going to be the hot thing. Apparently not. So how would you use that in this environment? So let's say you have your cloud on AWS environment. You would just simply create an EC2 instance, attach some block storage, and then archive off. And that would be your performance tier. Your capacity tier would be your S3 object, and that's where you would store data long term. So you guys are all on-prem, I guess. Oh, sorry, there is one. You're using this, okay. Yeah, so this is how you would use that feature. No issues with egress charges, because all of your data would, in that sense, stay on. That's the challenge with building these environments. That once you start backing data up, you're pulling it back down to your local data center and incurring charges. So keep it up there.
That proxy allowed you to take a ESX VM and restore it as an EC2 instance?
Yes. Actually, that leads on to my next slides, but yeah. Yep. So actually, that's a new feature in Update 4. So we can actually do the conversion from VMware to EC2. Sorry, I see you. We can do that, but actually, that's not what this is. That's not what this is displaying. I'm displaying how we would actually set up the architecture to back up your VMware environments. So we're writing to an EC2 instance that we install as a Veeam repository server. Yeah, that's what we would do. But actually, that does lead on to my next concept of cloud mobility. And again, this is a feature that was just introduced in update 4. So this is your local cloud here, obviously running VMware because we're a vMug. And let's say I want to do a restore. This new feature, you may not even be able to see it there. My laptop may be in the way, unfortunately. We always had the ability to restore to Azure. That was there in 3, I believe. We now have this new feature to restore to EC2. So in that scenario, let's say I have my production VMs and I want to be able to create a copy of my production application group into EC2. I'll choose that option and it will restore them. It will actually do copy, convert, restore all in one, just from clicking that button. It is cool. I actually did this as a test for my lab, and I used a 40 gig VMware host, SQL Server, and restored it to EC2, and it took about an hour to restore it. Most of that was obviously the copy process. So then we get it up there and we decide that, hey, wait a minute, Amazon's charging me too much money here. So then I can take those VMs that are being backed up now in AWS and I can restore them over to Azure. And finally, if I wanted to, I could then bring them back at the end just to really waste some time. But yeah, so we have this concept now. We're not locked into the underlying hypervisor, which is what this challenge is. VMware, KVM, Hyper-V. You know, we can convert between the different formats. So, pretty cool feature. Go install update 4. All right, the last on my list is talking a little about automating some of your environments. Anybody here use Sure Backup? I think you guys use Sure Backup. Yeah. Sure Backup is cool. Like, who here tests the restores? Okay. All right. So that's like a depending on the industry that you're in, that's like, you know, show me the logs that you tested your restores. I used to work in pharmaceutical. We would get audited all the time. And I would always say, I do enough restores that I don't need to do, but that works 50% of the time. We have a built-in feature called Sure Backup. It's a feature that, you know, very easy to set up. You can say, okay, these 5 VMs are every night, I want you to back them up. Once the backup is finished, I want you to restore them into my Data Labs isolated network, and then I want you to run this battery of tests that the VM is up, the OS is responding, and if it's a SQL box, run a SQL query against it. At the end, email me the report to say this restore worked. You can do it once a night, you can do it once a week, but you have a document to say that my restore worked successfully. So that can save, you know, an hour a week if you set this up. You can take this a step further though, because you can actually say, I know we have customers who will say, okay, I use this to test my upgrades to applications. Now, yes, I have a dev test environment, but typically that will skew from production. So if you take last night's backup of an application, you restore it to an isolated network, we can actually get access into that network, and we can actually test an upgrade, make sure the upgrade works, rerun the verification job to make it work. Okay, now my backup steps work, I can take this thing live, I can go over and do it in production. So, powerful feature, included in the product, you all have that. So, I just don't think we do a great job of necessarily advertising what we, you know, some of these features that we have. Actually, while we're on that topic, before I move on to this, who uses us for replication? Okay, who didn't know that we have a vSphere replication / SRM built into the product? Maybe you guys are using SRM. Again, I shouldn't upset the VMware folks. Yeah, so it's surprising how many of our customers are doing backup and restore as DR when we have a built-in ability to do a replication to a new host and failover as well. So I took you on a detour. Okay, tags. Who uses tags in their environments? Okay, in the VMware environment in general, not just in Veeam. Okay, so a few. It seems to be gaining more momentum here. A lot of my customers will use will back up by a cluster. The cluster is what they'll back up, or they'll manually put the VMs in, which is really dangerous. You do that, and you're guaranteed to miss VMs from your backups. Tags is another way we can back up. If you actually look up there, that is our tag icon. So when you're creating a job, you can create the job to include tags. So backup every machine that has this tag. That can be the job. And every time that job runs, it will query vCenter, give me a list of machines that have this tag. So great way, you know, I have customers who will use a backup weekly tag once a week. Every single VM that gets deployed has that tag. So at least you know you're getting one backup from it as well. You know, you get one backup. Hopefully that was useful to you. Again, this is just a taster of what we had. Please look at Hannah's documents. It goes into a huge depth about, especially around the backup modes. The backup modes is where you really want to spend your time. If you feel like you're not getting good performance from your backups, take a look at the document, but by all means reach out to your SE. Your SEs are trained on this and they can get to the root of the problem. Thank you.